The year is 1943. Deep inside Nazi-occupied Europe, sirens wail across the sky. And high above the clouds, something glides faster than sound can chase it. No armor, no guns, no steel. Just wood, glue, and genius. While the world forged its future in metal, Britain built a miracle in secret. A ghost of plywood and balsa that would humiliate the Luftwaffe, infuriate Hermann Göring, and change the course of aerial warfare. This is the story of the plane that shouldn't have worked, but did. The story of how art and craftsmanship defeated industry and arrogance. This is the de Havilland Mosquito, the wooden wonder that made Göring green and yellow with envy. The wooden dream. In the late 1930s, as storm clouds gathered over Europe, every major air force sought one thing: superiority through steel and fire. Britain built heavy bombers wrapped in armor. Germany perfected sleek machines of metal and menace. The future of war, everyone said, was forged in aluminum. But in a small English workshop, a quiet visionary disagreed. His name was Geoffrey de Havilland, a man who believed airplanes should move like birds, swift, light, and free. De Havilland looked around him and saw shortages of metal, but an abundance of something else: wood. Birch, spruce, balsa, materials used for furniture, not fighters. Yet he saw potential where others saw weakness. In 1938, he proposed an aircraft so fast it could outrun anything the enemy built. No armor, no guns, no heavy metal, just speed. He said, "If you can't hit it, you can't stop it." The Air Ministry was unimpressed. They laughed at the idea of a wooden bomber. One official sneered, "We're not building pianos, Mr. de Havilland." But Britain was running out of options, and men like de Havilland were running out of patience. He ignored the critics, withdrew his design from government bureaucracy, and began secretly building his dream in a hangar at Hatfield. Engineers and carpenters worked side by side, furniture makers crafting the future of aerial warfare. They didn't yet know it, but they were creating one of the most extraordinary aircraft ever to fly, a plane that would change the course of the air war and drive Hermann Göring himself to envy and despair, building the impossible. The first prototype began life not in a military factory, but in workshops that smelled of glue, sawdust, and courage. The de Havilland team used balsa sandwiched between birch plywood, creating a frame light as air, yet strong as steel. Without rivets or welds, the parts were bonded with an industrial adhesive so powerful it became a trade secret. Every seam was sealed by hand, every curve shaped with an artist's precision. When German bombers roared overhead during the Blitz, Hatfield's workers refused to stop. They moved production underground, building wings in secret locations and shipping them in pieces to avoid detection. By 1940, the first prototype, designation DH-98 Mosquito, was ready. It looked like no bomber before it, sleek, narrow, almost elegant. It had no gun turrets, no heavy armor, no escort fighters. It had something better: speed. The engine test sent shockwaves through the RAF, twin Rolls-Royce. Merlins, the same heart that powered the Spitfire, propelled. The Mosquito passed 400 miles per hour, faster than most fighters. The Air Ministry could no longer ignore it. Skepticism turned to disbelief as the wooden plane outpaced every metal aircraft Britain had built. One test pilot later said, "It flew like a dream. You felt as if the aircraft wanted to go faster, and you just had to let it." By late 1941, the Mosquito was approved for combat. Britain, battered but unbroken, had built a ghost, one that would soon haunt the skies of Nazi Europe. Flight of the wooden wonder. The Mosquito entered war not with a roar, but with a whisper. It appeared suddenly, struck swiftly, and vanished before enemy radar could react. Its first missions were photographic. Reconnaissance, flying alone over enemy territory at altitudes so high and speeds so great that Luftwaffe fighters could barely touch it. Then came the bombing raids. In early 1942, Mosquitoes hit targets in Norway, France, and Germany with surgical precision. They attacked Gestapo headquarters, prison walls, and rail lines, targets too dangerous for conventional bombers. Their accuracy was uncanny. In one famous raid, a pair of mosquitoes bombed the Berlin radio station minutes before Göring was scheduled to speak live. The explosion silenced the broadcast before the Reichsmarshal's words even reached the air. It was an insult Germany could not ignore. British pilots adored their wooden machines. They flew low, sometimes so low that frost formed on the wingtips from the spray of rivers. The Mosquito's agility made it a joy to handle and a nightmare to fight. No heavy bomber in the world could match its speed, range, and grace. It was part fighter, part bomber, part miracle, and Germany had no answer. The RAF began calling it the Wooden Wonder. Its nickname spread fast, whispered with admiration across Allied airfields. Back in Berlin, Göring's rage was boiling. Each time radar detected a mosquito, it was already gone. Each time Berlin's sirens wailed, they arrived in daylight, dropped their bombs, and disappeared into the clouds. And when one of those raids struck the German capital in 1943, Göring reportedly shouted to his officers, "The British can do anything they like with that damned plane." I turned green and yellow with envy. It wasn't just a complaint, it was a confession. The Mosquito had humiliated the Luftwaffe. Into battle. By 1943, the Mosquito had become more than an aircraft. It was a statement. It flew faster, farther, and with more precision than anyone thought possible. In the dark nights over Europe, its wooden frame hummed through the cold air, invisible to radar and unstoppable in the sky. The RAF used the Mosquito in ways no one had dared before. It flew daylight raids deep into occupied territory without fighter escort. It navigated by moonlight, hugging the ground at terrifying speed, so low that pilots could see their reflection on rivers and fields. When the Allies needed accuracy, they called the Mosquito. When they needed to strike fear, they called it again. In 1944, Mosquito squadrons bombed Gestapo headquarters in Oslo, Aarhus, and Copenhagen, daring daylight attacks designed to destroy records of resistance fighters before the Germans could execute them. Each mission was a gamble. One wrong move meant death, but success saved hundreds of lives, and when Britain wanted to send a message to Berlin, it chose the Mosquito. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, 3 Mosquitoes streaked across the capital in broad daylight, precisely timed to disrupt a Nazi parade and a live speech by Göring. The bombers arrived at the exact second the radio broadcast began. Explosions rocked Berlin. The broadcast cut to static. Göring's humiliation was total. Moments later, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, tried to continue his speech at another event, and another Mosquito attack silenced him too. That day, 2 British aircraft had silenced the voice of the Third Reich, and the Luftwaffe could do nothing about it. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. Not just bombs, but shame delivered at 400 miles per hour, Göring's rage. In Berlin's air ministry, Hermann Göring raged like a man possessed. His empire of steel was being humiliated by wood. He had promised Hitler domination of the skies, but the Luftwaffe was failing. The Spitfire had matched his Messerschmitts, and now the Mosquito mocked his entire air defense system. Göring's famous outburst was not a rumor. It was recorded by witnesses. After the Berlin raids, he shouted, "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. The British, who can afford aluminium better than we can, knock together a beautiful wooden aircraft that every piano factory over there is building, and they give it a speed which we can't beat." He paused, and his voice trembled with envy. I turned green and yellow with envy. That quote became immortal. It summed up the Luftwaffe's growing impotence. Göring immediately ordered his engineers to build a German equivalent, something that could match or destroy the Mosquito. He turned to Kurt Tank, chief designer at Focke-Wulf, the man behind the FW-190 fighter. Tank's challenge: build a high-speed night fighter and bomber made of wood, like the Mosquito, but better. They called it the Ta-154 Mosquito, a name chosen in both imitation and defiance. But as German factories struggled under Allied bombing and resource shortages. The project began in desperation rather than innovation. Britain's Mosquito was born of creativity. Germany's Mosquito was born of envy. The failed copy, the TAR-154, looked promising on paper. It was sleek, twin-engined, and made of plywood bonded with special adhesive. Early tests showed impressive speed, nearly matching the Mosquito's. But Germany was running out of everything: fuel, materials, and time. Worse, the country's chemical plants were being bombed to ruins. The original glue used for the aircraft, a high-quality resin, became unavailable. In its place, the regime ordered the use of a substitute, Tego film, produced with acidic chemicals that corroded the wood. The results were catastrophic. Several prototypes literally fell apart in the air, the fuselage splitting mid-flight. Kurt Tank was furious. He pleaded for better materials, but the Nazi bureaucracy refused to listen. Politics had consumed engineering. The Luftwaffe's leadership demanded miracles from men they didn't trust and punished those who told the truth. One engineer later said, "We could have built a rival to the Mosquito, but not under Göring." Innovation dies under dictatorship. By late 1944, the TAR-154 project was scrapped. The few remaining prototypes were destroyed by Allied bombs before they could ever see combat. Meanwhile, the de Havilland Mosquito was thriving. It flew reconnaissance over Berlin, bombed submarine pens in France, and guided night raids for the Pathfinder squadrons. Its wooden wings carried victory where metal had failed. Göring's imitation had collapsed under its own arrogance. Britain's creations soared higher than ever, masters of the sky. By 1944, the de Havilland Mosquito had evolved into one of the most versatile aircraft in history. It was the Swiss Army knife of the Royal Air Force, a single design that could be reshaped into almost anything the war required. It served as a bomber, slicing through the clouds at impossible speeds. It became a night fighter, intercepting enemy bombers in the dark with its new radar set. It worked as a pathfinder, racing ahead of heavy bomber streams to drop flares on the targets below. It flew as a photo reconnaissance aircraft, soaring at 50,000 feet and bringing home crystal-clear images of enemy territory when no other plane could survive there. Every new roll revealed another strength of the Mosquito. Its wooden skin confused radar. Its silence made it a ghost in the sky. Where other aircraft thundered, the Mosquito whispered. Pilots loved it. Crews called it mossy. It responded like a living thing, light under the hand and fiercely loyal in the air. One said it was like flying a violin, fragile, but if you touched it right, it sang. To the Germans, it became a nightmare. No warning, no pattern. Just the sudden wail of sirens and the whistle of bombs that fell with surgical accuracy. Cities learned to fear the Mosquito's thin hum as much as the roar of entire bomber wings. Even as new jet fighters appeared, none could match its combination of speed, stealth, and endurance. For a moment in time, wood ruled the skies, the craftsman and the courage. Behind every Mosquito stood an army of hands, ordinary British craftsmen who turned wood into weaponry. Cabinet makers from London, violin builders from Manchester, furniture workers from the Midlands, men and women who had never seen an airfield suddenly found themselves shaping the wings of war. Their workshops smelled of resin and determination. Each piece was cut, sanded, and fitted by eye. They built precision instruments with the patience of artists and the urgency of soldiers. When the Luftwaffe bombed factories, production scattered. Sections of fuselage were built in barns, garages, even school halls. Women carried parts on bicycles through blacked-out streets to keep the assembly lines moving. They worked long nights under rationed light, gluing and clamping until their hands blistered. Every finished fuselage carried their fingerprints beneath the varnish. The pilots who flew them knew this. Many Mosquito crews made a point of visiting the builders after missions, telling them how their work had survived flak and fire. For those craftsmen, hearing, "She brought us home," was worth more than any medal. It was a partnership of courage, the pilots in the air, the builders on the ground, joined by the shared belief that intelligence and skill could defeat brutality. Göring's envy and the fall of the Luftwaffe. While Britain celebrated its wooden wonder, Germany's skies darkened. The Luftwaffe that once ruled Europe was now gasping for breath. Fuel shortages grounded entire squadrons. Factories lay in ruins. Pilots were boys barely out of training. And above it all hung the memory of the plane they could never catch. Göring's envy had turned into obsession. He demanded explanations, punishments, miracles. He raged that Britain's toy plane had humiliated the Reich's engineering might. But envy could not rebuild what arrogance had destroyed. Germany's rigid system had crushed the very creativity that might have saved it. Its scientists worked in fear. Its engineers bowed to politics. Where the Mosquito's birth had been collaboration between artists and innovators, Germany's copies were chained by command. By 1945, the Luftwaffe was shattered. The last Tu-154 prototypes lay broken in their hangars, the product of a dream poisoned by dictatorship. When Göring was captured at the end of the war, Allied officers questioned him about Britain's aircraft. He admitted, with the weary bitterness of defeat, "The Mosquito. It made me green and yellow with envy." Those words became the epitaph for the Luftwaffe's downfall, not written on stone, but whispered through history, the legacy of wood. Peace returned, and with it reflection. In the jet age that followed, the Mosquito seemed like a relic, a wooden bird in a world of steel and thunder. But its influence reached further than anyone expected. Its design taught engineers that lightness could mean strength, that materials were only as limited as imagination allowed. The composite structures of modern aircraft, the stealth coatings that confuse radar, all trace their lineage to the lessons of the Mosquito. For Britain, it became a symbol of wartime ingenuity. For the world, a reminder that simplicity, executed perfectly, can outperform complexity built in fear. A handful of Mosquitoes survive today. Restored by craftsmen who treat them like sacred relics, they fly at air shows with the same graceful menace as they did in 1943. Audiences fall silent when the twin Merlin engines start. The sound is not loud, it is elegant, haunting. It is the voice of a time when courage was carved from wood. Epilogue. Echoes of the wooden wonder. In every war, technology tells a story, not just of machines, but of the people who built them. The de Havilland Mosquito tells the story of imagination defeating tyranny, of artists defeating industrial arrogance, of freedom defeating fear. While Göring's empire crumbled under the weight of its own pride, a small group of dreamers proved that genius needs no permission. They turned plywood into power and craft into legend. More than 80 years later, when a Mosquito takes flight, its polished wooden skin glimmers like amber in the sun. For a brief moment, the past returns, a whisper from an age when wood outran metal, when ingenuity humbled an empire, and when envy turned green and yellow in the shadow of a wooden wing. The Mosquito, the plane that shouldn't have worked, but did. The plane that made Hermann Göring envy the impossible. The echo of courage that still hums across the skies. In a war defined by steel and fire, it was wood that wrote one of its brightest chapters. The de Havilland Mosquito proved that imagination can fly faster than fear, that freedom can outthink tyranny. Long after the guns fell silent, its echo remained in every jet that values speed over size, in every design born from courage over conformity. Today, when one of the few surviving Mosquitoes takes flight, you can still feel history vibrate in its wings. The hum is soft, but the message is thunder. Genius needs no permission. This is not just a story about a plane, it's a story about people who believed that the impossible could fly. Echoes of WWII, where history's hidden stories still soar.